I want to take you briefly back to the kind of documentation you've done of early Bombay. The beginnings of the fashion industry and how catty and bitchy it could be. And she has some wonderful narratives about a particular inheritor who had a fascination for shoes and was a bit of a groper, and takes her upstairs to his closet where he has this amazing collection of shoes, and then of course tries to sleep with her, to put it politely. But there's a lot of such early history of Bombay, the fashion and how all of you were just sort of thrown in, and you were the stars. It was not the clothes that were the stars, you were the stars. And there's Meher Jaisia, there's Shamli Verma. So, and the early jazz clubs, the first discotheque. So how was that? Coming back to Bombay now, do you ever recognize it and say, my God, this was the city that I came to as a 16-year-old, 17? Maureen Wadia, a very important part of your journey, very complex character, and you show her in a marvelous way. I think I've never read anything quite like that about her. So how was that early part of seeing Bombay fashion industry just boom?
It all happened, of course, serendipitously,
Yes.
that we can get into later. I have to emphasize that I never planned on being in this line at all. So I remained ambivalent about it, but maybe the ambivalence gave me the benefit of having a little bit of an observer's eye. So I always felt like I was like in Gulliver's Travels, Even though I was living through these experiences, there was a part of me that was actually able to watch and observe. And I think I felt intuitively that I was traveling through a very special time. I actually feel great affection for that time. I think that we collectively in the 90s, particularly models and designers that I've named, and who are still often, like many of these names and their careers have endured, which is a great testament to their talent.
So is yours.
And well, that's a different story altogether. But we were putting together, I think as I put in the book, the nuts and the bolts of the industry. But so it was still kind of a very Wild West kind of a situation, because the entertainment industry has changed so dramatically to where it is today. It's so codified, it's so corporatized, it's kind of gotten all glossy and not quite as rough around the edges. And as good as that is, because now I have my own entourage, I've got my manager and my publicist and my stylist and things like that, which did not exist in those days, something has been lost. Something also has been lost. So I feel very fortunate to have lived through that time, and I'll explain why. But I wanted to also address what you were asking me, Kaveree, which is also this idea of how I react to Bombay today. And I think that what's magnificent about Bombay is, for me, it's a collage. I still, when I go to certain parts of Bombay, I will get, a little bit of deja vu. And I see, these kinds of almost an overlay, like of a memory, and then it disappears. And it really is the city that's formed me, the city that's tutored me, that's taught me, that's broken me, and that's built me back together. So I have a very strong relationship with Bombay, in all its many forms that it's taken. But the 90s were very fascinating for that. We were actually putting together the architecture of the, not just the fashion industry, but I think the industry as it exists today. But it was much more familial in those days, It wasn't quite as transactional. We were all one happy family, and in that sense, like every family, we also bitched each other out, and we had each other's back. We were very, very supportive of each other. There was a great kind of, an emotional connection that would transcend the kind of everyday motions of our life. And in those days, you have to remember, there was a handful of models, right? There was Meher Jaisia, who is also unforgettable, Madhu. There was Rachel Rubin, who was also very ambivalent about her career. There was Ash, who was just coming in. But what was interesting is we all kind of had our own space, our own personality, and that personality wasn't overlaid or dictated by a lot of corporate impulses the way that they are today. A lot of people say, but everyone looks the same today and everyone dresses the same today. Well, that's because everyone's using the same stylist and the same publicist, and there is, you know, kind of, it's weird because it almost feels like everyone is, even though in certain ways India has advanced in terms of freedom of speech, and perhaps we're addressing a lot of issues that were not talked about openly before, there's a lot more conformity in the industry. That's my perception of it, because we were really kind of the original hippie boho kids, you know.
Flower kids, really.
Flower kids.
Yeah.
We were wild childs. But we were appreciated also for our personalities, and I think our personalities were strong and they came through, and they weren't compromised in what we did. And that was also the era of models. So it was actually very lucrative to be a model in those days. There was no huge overriding motivation to be part of the Bollywood film industry. Let's not forget, the 90s was the era of Govinda and gyrations and really, really, really bad fashion sense in Bollywood, you know. So it wasn't. And you also, please also, recall. You will recall this, I'm sure, Kaveree, that it would take a painful 1 year for a film to be completed because there was no real schedule. There were no dialogues were written in a corner on the set. There was no rhyme or reason, and everything was bound around the hero's schedule. And by that I mean, you know, if he said, mood nahi hai, he would just not show up. And so as the heroine, as a woman, you would be beholden to all of these forces. You were not in charge of your own schedule. You were not free, you know. You were really, really bound to these very archaic rules and regulations that were running beneath the surface of Bollywood. There was no motivation, and the money was not that good. Right. So imagine, you know, you got, you know, maybe this chunk of money, it was stretched out over a year or 2 years, whereas I could go off and do an ad film, you know, and be flown off to perhaps Mauritius or something, someplace wonderful like that, be done with it in 3 days and make a good amount of money.